Well, if he hasn't figured out it's a human by now.
I feel bad for the guy. Just hope he doesn't get wise. I hate to do this to you, but you think you can help me pick up the slack on those etch a sketches?
That it's a human by now. I don't think he ever will.
Yeah.
Mr. Hobbs? It's me on the intercom.
Go ahead.
Glass of water. I walked all day and night to find you.
You look like you came from the North Pole.
That's exactly where I came from. Santa must have called you. Adopted, but you didn't know I was born. And guess what? I love you. I love you. I love you.
Usually guys just, put my name in the jingle bells or something.
Hey, buddy, how you doing? Santa.
What are you talking about? I'm Santa Claus.
Well, if you're Santa, what song did I sing for you on your birthday this year?
Happy birthday, of course.
You disgust me. How can you live with yourself?
Just cool it, Zippy. He's kidding.
You stink.
I think you're gonna have a good Christmas.
Will Ferrell.
Okay, people, Santa's coming to town. Strong, my friend. Call me Elf. Hey, you feeling
Me? Dude, I didn't recognize
I
you.
know, I'm in work clothes. I know him. I know him.
Elf.
Do you remember?
There it is, my friend.
Did you have to borrow a reindeer to get down here?
One more time.
Oh my God!
Snow crunches under tiny boots. Bells jingle. Somewhere high above the clouds, a mistake is being made. A human baby, wrapped in red, crawls across the towering workshop floor of the North Pole, unseen as elves rush past with lists and laughter. He slips into Santa's sack, swallowed by toys and destiny, carried away into a world that isn't meant for him. Years later, that baby grows impossibly tall, impossibly cheerful, and completely wrong for this place. Buddy smiles wider than anyone, works harder, believes more. But whispers follow him. Glances linger. He doesn't fit. Then one quiet moment shatters everything. A secret, a truth about who he really is. And suddenly, the North Pole isn't home anymore. The truth lands softly, almost gently, but it caves him in. Buddy hears the words and laughs at first, because they don't make sense. Humans aren't real to him. They're stories. But the room feels colder as the explanation continues. The photo proves it. A hospital. A woman. A name that isn't elf-made. Buddy's smile fades, not into anger, but confusion. Deep. Cracking. Everything he believed about himself bends. The rules of his world suddenly have edges. He's not special. He's misplaced. That night, while the North Pole sleeps, Buddy packs his things. Not with fear, with hope. Because if he doesn't belong here, then somewhere else must be waiting. The world beyond the snow hits him like a shout. New York roars. Cars scream past. Steam rises from the ground like the city itself is breathing. Buddy steps into it, smiling, waving, trusting. He hugs strangers, eats gum from railings, presses his face to windows glowing with color and chaos. Everything is louder, sharper, faster, and none of it feels like home. Then he finds the name, his father's name, a man who doesn't believe in Santa, or magic, or him. Buddy climbs the stairs, heart pounding, ready to belong at last. The door opens, and the man inside looks at him like he's a mistake. The rejection isn't loud. That's what hurts. Walter Hobbs barely looks up. Papers, deadlines, a life built on speed. Buddy stands there, smiling too long, holding on to hope like it might slip if he loosens his grip. He says the word Dad like it's sacred. Walter hears it like a threat. Security is called. The building swallows Buddy and spits him back onto the street. That night, the city feels colder, louder, meaner. Buddy wanders past glowing windows filled with things that don't love back. He sleeps standing up in a mailroom, clutching his book of Christmas memories. But here's the thing, Buddy doesn't quit. He goes back. Again. And again. Because belief, once born, is hard to kill. Something changes when Buddy refuses to disappear. Walter notices it in fragments. The singing, the decorations invading gray office walls, the way this grown man looks at the world like it hasn't failed him yet. Buddy meets his brother, protects him, embarrasses him, loves him instantly. And that's the problem. Love is messy, inconvenient, dangerous. Walter tries to ignore it. Until work asks him to lie. Until his son looks disappointed. Until Buddy walks out, finally tired, finally hurt. Snow starts to fall again. And for the first time in years, Walter feels it. The fear of losing something he never learned how to keep. The sleigh doesn't fly. Engines fail. Lights fade. Christmas hangs in the air, fragile as glass. Crowds gather, doubting, watching. And Buddy runs. And Buddy runs. Through traffic. Through fear. Through every voice that ever told him to stop believing. He sings. Loud. Off-key. Alone at first. Then a child joins. Then another. Then thousands. Walter watches his son sing without shame. Something breaks open. He steps forward, adds his voice. It's terrible. It's perfect. The sleigh lifts. Magic wasn't gone. It was waiting. The sleigh lifts. Magic wasn't gone. It was waiting. The snow settles gently this time. Morning comes softer than before. Buddy stands with the family he fought to believe in. A father who learned too late that joy is louder than fear. A brother who smiles without embarrassment now. And someone who sees Buddy not as strange, but as brave. The world didn't change overnight. It never does. But Buddy did. And so did Walter. Because belonging isn't about where you're from. It's about who shows up, who stays, who believes when it's hard. Buddy looks at the city, eyes bright, heart full. Home isn't the North Pole. Home is where love answers back. The city doesn't clap. It exhales. After the sleigh disappears into the clouds, people drift back to their lives, pretending they didn't just believe in something impossible. Buddy stays behind a moment longer, boots planted in the snow, listening to the echo of songs fading between buildings. The silence feels different now, not empty, settled. Walter stands beside him, unsure what to say. He spent a lifetime fixing problems with words. This one needs something else. He puts a hand on Buddy's shoulder. Awkward. Real. Buddy looks up, surprised. Smiles. For the first time, nothing needs to be proven. But belief, once found, asks a dangerous question. What happens tomorrow? Morning doesn't arrive with magic. It arrives with noise. Traffic. Alarms. Coffee steaming through paper cups. Buddy wakes early, already dressed, already smiling, like joy might be late if he doesn't hurry it along. He helps decorate a city that's pretending yesterday never happened. Lights flicker. Some don't turn on. Some do. Enough. Walter watches from the window. The world hasn't slowed down for belief. It never does. And that scares him. Because believing once was easy. Believing every day is the real cost. Buddy heads outside, humming, spreading cheer like breadcrumbs. Behind him, Walter hesitates. Because this time, if Buddy walks away, he might not come back. Buddy doesn't notice the shift at first, but the smiles linger longer now. A doorman tips his hat. A woman hums the tune from last night without realizing it. A child pulls free from his mother's hand just to wave. The city didn't forget. It just hides belief behind routine. Buddy feels it in his chest. Warm. Fragile. Worth protecting. Meanwhile, Walter walks to work instead of calling a car. The cold bites. He deserves it. Every step gives him time to think about all the moments he rushed past. All the joy he labeled as impractical, all the times he chose safe over real. He stops walking, turns around, and runs. Because some things don't wait forever. Walter finds Buddy where the noise thins out. A side street. Snow pushed into gray piles. Buddy is helping an old man fix a broken sign, laughing like time isn't real. Walter stops short, breath burning, heart louder than traffic. He almost doesn't say it, almost lets fear win again. But then he does. I believe you. The words are clumsy, late, honest. Buddy freezes, turns slowly. His eyes search Walter's face, looking for the joke, the catch, the exit. There isn't one. Walter's voice cracks. He doesn't hide it. Something lifts off Buddy's chest. He steps forward, hugs him, tight. The city keeps moving. It always will. But now, it moves with something extra tucked beneath the noise. Buddy walks forward with his family beside him, not ahead, not behind. Together. The lights overhead flicker again. This time, all of them turn on. No cheering. No miracle soundtrack. Just quiet understanding. Walter loosens his tie. Doesn't put it back on. Not today. Maybe not ever. Buddy looks up at the buildings, the sky, the ordinary wonder of it all. He doesn't need the North Pole anymore. He brought it with him. Because magic was never in the sleigh. It was never in Santa. It was in choosing joy when the world tells you not to. In believing out loud without apology. Buddy smiles. And the city, just for a second, smiles back. Buddy the elf didn't arrive fully formed out of Santa's workshop. He came from a moment of career pivot, studio uncertainty, and a director who was quietly reinventing himself. When Jon Favreau stepped behind the camera for Elf in 2003, he wasn't yet the blockbuster architect audiences now associate with Iron Man or The Jungle Book. He was a filmmaker still shaking off the label of indie wunderkind, best known for Swingers and Made. Elf looks like a studio comedy on the surface, but its creative DNA tells a more interesting story. One about sincerity as rebellion and optimism as a deliberate artistic choice. Favreau's early career was fueled by dialogue-heavy, character-driven films that prized emotional authenticity over spectacle. Swingers worked because it understood male insecurity without mocking it. That instinct to treat vulnerability seriously, even inside comedy, becomes the backbone of Elf. Favreau didn't see the film as a gag delivery system wrapped in Christmas lights. He saw it as a fish-out-of-water story played completely straight from its protagonist's point of view. Buddy believes in the world with absolute conviction. The movie dares you to do the same. Here's the gamble. Sincerity is risky in modern comedy. Irony is safer. Snark gets laughs without demanding emotional buy-in. Elf rejects that safety net entirely. Favreau's vision hinges on a simple but dangerous idea. If everyone commits fully, the audience will follow. No winking at the camera. No apology for sweetness. When Buddy says, "The best way to spread Christmas cheer is singing loud for all to hear," the line works because the film never treats it as a joke. That confidence comes straight from Favreau's directing philosophy. The project itself wasn't born out of Favreau's personal obsession with Christmas mythology. The script had been floating around Hollywood for years before landing at New Line Cinema, long before Will Ferrell was attached. What drew Favreau in was tonal potential. He recognized that the story could collapse into parody or explode into something timeless depending on execution. His job wasn't to make the movie funnier, it was to protect its heart. That's a director's instinct, not a comedian's. Watch how Favreau frames Buddy's journey from the North Pole to New York. The North Pole isn't played as magical realism or sarcastic fantasy. It's tactile. Toys are handmade. Sets feel slightly imperfect. You can almost smell the sawdust. Favreau leaned heavily into practical environments because he wanted Buddy's innocence to feel earned, not manufactured. When Buddy later crashes into Manhattan's cold geometry, the contrast lands instantly. This isn't just a change of location, it's a collision of worldviews. Favreau's collaboration style also matters here. He's not an authoritarian director chasing a singular visual signature. He builds space for performers, especially comedians, to explore. But that freedom comes with boundaries. Will Ferrell could improvise, but only within Buddy's emotional truth. No sarcasm, no self-awareness. Favreau understood that Ferrell's usual comedic weapons, irony, exaggeration, knowing absurdity, would destroy the illusion if used unchecked. So he redirected that energy into physicality and earnestness. The result feels radical because it is. New Line Cinema's backing gave the film a mid-range budget by studio comedy standards, but not enough to coast on spectacle. That limitation helped. Favreau couldn't hide behind effects or scale. He had to make tone do the heavy lifting. Every creative decision funnels back to that central mission: protect Buddy's worldview at all costs. If the world mocks him, the camera doesn't. If adults roll their eyes, the film doesn't join them. That alignment between perspective and direction is why Elf endures. This also explains why Elf doesn't feel dated in the way many early 2000s comedies do. There's no pop culture dependency, no mean-spirited edge, aging poorly with time. Favreau aimed for something closer to a modern fairy tale, grounded in recognizable human behavior. Cynicism exists in the story. James Caan's Walter Hobbs embodies it, but it's treated as a problem to be healed, not a default attitude to be celebrated. By the time Elf reached theaters, Favreau had quietly delivered something rare: a Christmas movie without smugness, a comedy without cruelty, a studio film powered by belief. That creative foundation, the insistence that emotional honesty matters more than punchlines, sets up everything that follows, because none of it works unless the story itself is built with care. And that care begins on the page. But before cameras rolled, before Ferrell put on the tights, before Buddy ever stepped into New York City, someone had to figure out how this strange, heartfelt idea actually worked as a script. And that story is where things get surprisingly complicated. If Jon Favreau was the guardian of Elf's emotional tone, the script was the fragile engine that made that tone possible. And for a long time, that engine sat untouched. Elf began as a spec screenplay written by David Berenbaum in the mid-1990s, back when high-concept comedies lived or died on a single-pitch sentence. A human raised by elves travels to New York to find his real father. That logline sold easily. Making it work on the page? Much harder. Berenbaum's original draft leaned darker than the finished film. Buddy was more alienated, the world more hostile, the comedy sharper around the edges. Studios liked the concept, but hesitated over the execution, unsure whether audiences would embrace a protagonist so fundamentally sincere without irony to cushion the blows. For years, the script bounced between desks, gathering interest but never momentum. In Hollywood terms, it was the worst kind of promising, good enough to survive, not bold enough to greenlight. What finally unlocked the script wasn't a rewrite chasing bigger laughs. It was a philosophical shift. When Favreau came on board, the focus moved away from satirizing Christmas culture and toward interrogating adulthood itself. The story stopped asking, "Is Buddy ridiculous?" and started asking, "Why did the world forget how to feel?" That change reshaped everything, from dialogue rhythm to character arcs, without fundamentally altering the premise. Structurally, Elf follows a clean 3-act design, but it hides its mechanics well. Act 1 establishes Buddy's identity crisis in the North Pole, playing his difference for warmth rather than embarrassment. Act 2 throws him into New York, escalating conflict through cultural friction rather than plot contrivance. Act 3 resolves not with conquest or dominance, but with reconciliation between father and son, cynicism and belief, adulthood and joy. It's classical storytelling disguised as chaos. The dialogue does a lot of heavy lifting here. Buddy's lines aren't funny because they're clever. They're funny because they're literal. Does Santa know you? Works as a punchline because the script commits to Buddy's worldview without qualification. Berenbaum's writing strips language down to intention. People say what they mean. Subtext exists, but Buddy can't see it, and that contrast generates comedy organically. The joke isn't Buddy's ignorance, it's everyone else's emotional illiteracy. That approach required discipline. Any hint of sarcasm from Buddy would have collapsed the illusion. So the script builds humor through repetition and escalation. Buddy eats spaghetti with syrup once. It's odd. He does it repeatedly. It becomes character logic. By the time he lists candy, candy canes, candy corns, and syrup as food groups, the audience isn't laughing at the absurdity. They're laughing at the consistency. The script understands that character-based comedy lasts longer than topical jokes. The father-son dynamic between Buddy and Walter Hobbs also benefited from refinement. Early drafts painted Walter as outright cruel. Later revisions softened him, not by excusing his behavior, but by contextualizing it. He isn't a villain. He's a man suffocating under professional obligation and emotional repression. That nuance matters. If Walter were purely antagonistic, Buddy's optimism would feel naive. By making Walter human, the script turns their conflict into a mirror rather than a battle. Jovi's role evolved similarly. She could have been written as a manic pixie counterweight or a sarcastic observer. Instead, the script positions her as someone quietly learning to believe again. Her skepticism isn't mocking, it's protective. She's afraid of disappointment. That emotional alignment with Buddy gives the story its romantic spine without derailing the central arc. The romance doesn't save Buddy. Buddy saves the possibility of romance. One of the smartest screenwriting choices is restraint. The script resists explaining its themes outright. No monologues about the meaning of Christmas. No speeches about faith or wonder. Everything is externalized through behavior. Buddy decorates. Buddy sings. Buddy shows up. The screenplay trusts actions to carry meaning, a rare confidence in studio comedies of the era. And then there's the ending, often the graveyard of comedies like this. Elf avoids the trap of a purely ironic resolution. Santa's sleigh doesn't fly because technology improves. It flies because people believe. That's risky, uncool, completely sincere. The script earns it by spending the entire film proving that belief is an active choice, not a childish fantasy. When the crowd sings, it doesn't feel manipulative. It feels inevitable. By the time cameras rolled, Elf wasn't just a clever idea anymore. It was a script that understood its own emotional math. Laughs plus heart, multiplied by commitment, divided by cynicism. Simple, dangerous, effective. But a script, no matter how carefully calibrated, lives or dies on who brings it to life. And when casting began, Elf faced its biggest gamble yet, finding actors willing to play this world straight, without embarrassment, without irony, and without blinking. Casting Elf wasn't about finding the funniest people in the room. It was about finding the bravest. This movie only works if the actors commit without protection. No irony, no self-awareness, no safety net. One cracked smile in the wrong place, and the entire illusion collapses. The casting process became an exercise in trust. Trust that sincerity could still sell. Trust that audiences wouldn't reject a character who believes this hard. And trust that performers would leap without checking for a parachute. Everything hinged on Will Ferrell. By 2002, Ferrell was riding a wave of popularity from Saturday Night Live and films like Old School. He was known for exaggeration, for characters who winked at their own absurdity. On paper, Buddy the Elf looked like another broad caricature. In practice, he was the opposite. Favreau didn't want Ferrell to play funny. He wanted him to play honest. And that distinction scared the studio more than any budget concern. Several actors circled the role before Ferrell committed, and the hesitation was understandable. Buddy requires total emotional exposure. He cries easily. He loves openly. He fails without shame. Most comedy leads are armored with sarcasm. Buddy has none. Ferrell surprised everyone by leaning into that vulnerability instead of resisting it. He didn't approach Buddy as a joke machine. He treated him like a child trapped in an adult body, navigating a world that has forgotten how to speak his language. That choice reframed Ferrell's entire screen persona. The physical comedy, the running, the oversized gestures, the ecstatic reactions, comes not from mockery, but from enthusiasm. Watch his posture. Buddy leans forward when people speak, like he can't absorb information fast enough. He invades personal space not because he's oblivious, but because he's eager. That distinction is everything, and it was visible from the audition stage. Favreau saw an actor willing to look ridiculous without trying to be funny. That's rare. Casting James Caan as Walter Hobbs was the next crucial decision, and it was inspired. Caan arrived with decades of cinematic authority, forever associated with tough men and moral rigidity. The Godfather energy. Bringing that gravity into a Christmas comedy could have flattened the tone. Instead, it grounded it. Walter's cynicism works because it feels earned. This is a man who has built his identity on control. Buddy doesn't threaten him intellectually, he threatens him emotionally. Caan played Walter completely straight. No softening, no comedic cushioning. His irritation is real. His impatience is sharp. That realism creates friction the film desperately needs. If Walter were cartoonishly cruel, Buddy's optimism would feel naive. By making Walter recognizably human stressed, defensive, emotionally constipated, the casting turns their relationship into the spine of the film. You're not waiting for Walter to be defeated. You're waiting for him to thaw. Zooey Deschanel's casting as Jovi added a different kind of balance. At the time, she wasn't yet the indie icon persona audiences would later associate with quirky detachment. Here, she plays restraint. Jovi is guarded, observant, quietly wounded. Deschanel's natural softness could have tipped into twee. Instead, she plays emotional caution. Her flat affect isn't boredom, it's armor. That makes her eventual openness feel earned rather than scripted. The chemistry between Ferrell and Deschanel works because it's asymmetrical. Buddy overwhelms. Jovi absorbs. Their scenes aren't built around banter, they're built around contrast. He sings loudly. She barely hums. He believes immediately. She hesitates. Casting an actress who could underplay without disengaging was essential, and Deschanel threads that needle. She never mocks Buddy. She watches him. That gaze becomes the audience's entry point into belief. The supporting cast fills out the world with similar intentionality. Bob Newhart as Papa Elf brings warmth without sentimentality. His voice alone carries reassurance, and his gentle authority establishes the North Pole as a place of order rather than chaos. Newhart's comedic timing is surgical, but he uses it sparingly. He's not there to steal scenes. He's there to anchor Buddy's origin. Mary Steenburgen, as Buddy's stepmother Emily, plays kindness without condescension. That's harder than it sounds. She treats Buddy like a person from the moment he enters the house, not a problem to be solved. Casting an actress with natural empathy prevents the character from becoming a narrative device. Emily isn't there to fix Walter. She's there to show another way of living. Even minor roles reflect this philosophy. Peter Dinklage's cameo lands because everyone plays it straight except Buddy. And Buddy isn't trying to be funny. He's trying to protect dignity. That reversal flips the joke inward. The humor comes from moral certainty colliding with social chaos, not from punching down. What emerges from these casting choices is a unified tone. No one is performing in a different movie. That's the real miracle. Comedies often feel like collections of individual rhythms competing for attention. Elf feels orchestrated. Every actor understands the assignment. Treat the world as real, treat Buddy as sincere, and let the absurdity arise naturally. By the time filming began, the cast wasn't just assembled, they were aligned. That alignment allowed performances to breathe without fear of tonal collapse. And once the actors were locked in, something else had to rise to meet them, a physical world capable of holding that sincerity without cracking under it. Because belief doesn't live in dialogue alone. It lives in spaces, in textures, in color. And Elf needed a world that looked like it deserved Buddy's faith. Will Ferrell's performance as Buddy the Elf looks effortless. That's the trick. What he's doing here is deceptively complex, because the role demands complete emotional exposure without irony, without commentary, and without a single protective layer. Buddy isn't a parody of innocence. He's innocence, unfiltered. And Ferrell commits so fully that the performance rewires how audiences perceive him, not just in this film, but for the rest of his career. Buddy's emotional arc isn't about growth in the traditional sense. He doesn't become smarter, sharper, or more cynical. He remains constant while the world around him shifts. That inversion is risky. Most protagonists change to fit their environment. Buddy forces the environment to confront itself. Ferrell plays this not as stubbornness, but as moral clarity. Buddy knows who he is from the opening frames, and Ferrell never lets that certainty wobble, even when the character is hurt, rejected, or humiliated. The physicality is the first thing people remember, but it's the least interesting part of the performance. Yes, the exaggerated runs, the childlike gestures, the way Buddy occupies space like someone encountering gravity for the first time. It's all precise. But underneath that is control. Ferrell calibrates Buddy's movements to emotion. When Buddy is excited, his body explodes outward. When he's confused, he freezes. When he's hurt, he shrinks. Not into bitterness, but into stillness. That restraint is doing more work than the broad comedy ever could. Watch Ferrell's face when Buddy realizes Walter doesn't want him. There's no tantrum, no comic meltdown. His expression empties. The smile drains. His eyes search for logic where none exists. That moment lands because Ferrell resists exaggeration. He lets the disappointment sit, long enough to hurt. The comedy pauses, and the film breathes. That pause is courage. Many comedians rush past vulnerability. Ferrell stands in it. This performance also weaponizes sincerity in scenes that could easily tip into cringe. Buddy's enthusiasm, hugging strangers, shouting compliments, believing every promise, would feel unbearable if played for mockery. Ferrell never judges Buddy's behavior. He doesn't signal to the audience that he knows this is strange. He behaves as if the world is strange for not responding in kind. That inversion flips the joke outward. We're not laughing at Buddy, we're laughing at ourselves. Ferrell's chemistry with James Caan is built on opposition rather than rapport. Walter Hobbs is all edges, controlled posture, minimal gestures, compressed emotion. Ferrell counters that with openness and physical sprawl. Their scenes function like visual arguments. Buddy leans in. Walter leans away. Buddy raises his voice in joy. Walter lowers his in irritation. Caan's refusal to soften early on gives Ferrell something real to push against. Buddy's optimism isn't abstract, it's tested. Caan's performance deserves equal scrutiny. Walter could have been a caricature of the workaholic father. Caan refuses that simplicity. He plays Walter as a man whose identity is collapsing under pressure. His anger isn't cruelty, it's fear. Fear of losing control, fear of emotional exposure, fear of being seen as inadequate. Caan communicates this through rigidity. Every movement feels measured, every reaction delayed. He's constantly bracing for impact, and Buddy is pure impact. The brilliance of Caan's work emerges in the thaw. When Walter finally begins to crack, it's not through grand confession. It's through micro-adjustments, a softer gaze, a slower response, a willingness to listen. Caan doesn't announce the change. He allows it to happen incrementally, which makes the transformation believable. When Walter chooses Buddy over his job, it feels earned because we've watched the resistance erode brick by brick. Zooey Deschanel's Jovi operates on a quieter register, but her performance is just as intentional. Jovi starts emotionally muted, not because she lacks feeling, but because she's learned to suppress it. Deschanel plays that suppression with subtle detachment, flat delivery, guarded posture, minimal eye contact. She's present, but protected. Buddy doesn't break through that armor with grand gestures. He wears it down through consistency. Deschanel's vocal performance is particularly effective. She speaks softly, often trailing off, as if testing whether it's safe to finish a thought. When she eventually sings, the moment lands not because it's technically impressive, but because it represents risk. Her voice cracks slightly. That imperfection matters. It mirrors Buddy's emotional transparency and signals her willingness to meet him halfway. The romance works because it's about shared vulnerability, not opposites attracting. Bob Newhart's Papa Elf offers a different acting lesson entirely: economy. He doesn't push for laughs. He lets warmth do the work. His calm, reassuring presence establishes Buddy's foundation. You believe Buddy is the way he is because someone like Papa Elf raised him. Newhart's gentle authority gives the North Pole emotional credibility, which is essential. Without it, Buddy's values would feel arbitrary. Mary Steenburgen's Emily Hobbs brings emotional intelligence into the household dynamic. She recognizes Buddy's sincerity immediately and responds with kindness rather than caution. Steenburgen plays empathy as instinct, not performance. She listens. She adjusts. She creates space. That presence allows the film to show an alternative model of adulthood, one that doesn't require cynicism to function. Even in brief appearances, the acting remains locked into the same tonal agreement. Peter Dinklage's furious writer is funny not because of outrage, but because Ferrell's Buddy refuses to accept cruelty as normal. Ferrell doesn't play the moment for dominance. He plays it for justice. That moral certainty reframes the joke entirely. What makes these performances endure is cohesion. No one is chasing punchlines. No one is protecting their image. Every actor behaves as if the emotional stakes are real. That collective commitment allows Elf to balance comedy and heart without tearing itself apart. And once those performances are in place, once the characters feel alive and emotionally coherent, the film still has one more test to pass. It needs a world that can hold them. A physical environment detailed enough to feel lived in, stylized enough to feel magical, and grounded enough to make belief plausible. Because sincerity can survive bad jokes, it can't survive a fake world. A film like Elf lives or dies on its lead, but it lasts because of the people orbiting that lead. The supporting cast doesn't just fill space between Buddy's set pieces. They shape the emotional ecosystem he moves through. What makes this ensemble special isn't volume or showiness, it's discipline. Every supporting performance understands when to step forward, when to recede, and when simply to hold the line so Buddy's sincerity has something to push against. Start with Bob Newhart's Papa Elf, because everything flows from there. Newhart doesn't play him as a goofy authority figure or a joke delivery system. He plays him as a parent. Calm, patient, slightly worried. That warmth isn't accidental, it's foundational. Buddy's worldview doesn't emerge out of nowhere. It's modeled. Papa Elf explains rules gently, corrects mistakes without shame, and offers reassurance without condescension. Newhart's dry cadence softens into something almost paternal, and that tonal choice gives the North Pole emotional legitimacy. Without it, Buddy would feel like a cartoon raised in a cartoon world. Instead, he feels raised. The brilliance of Newhart's performance lies in restraint. He rarely raises his voice. He never rushes a line. That steadiness contrasts sharply with Buddy's boundless energy, creating a rhythm that feels lived in. You believe this relationship because it isn't cute, it's functional. Papa Elf isn't there to entertain Buddy. He's there to guide him. That subtle authority carries emotional weight long after the North Pole disappears from the story. Then there's Mary Steenburgen as Emily Hobbs, one of the quiet heroes of the film. Emily could have been written as a generic, nice stepmom, but Steenburgen gives her specificity. She listens more than she speaks. She observes before reacting. The moment Buddy enters the Hobbs household, Emily adjusts instinctively, not because she's saintly, but because she's emotionally literate. Steenburgen plays kindness as intelligence, not softness. What makes Emily essential is that she models an alternative adulthood. Walter represents success stripped of joy. Emily represents stability without emotional shutdown. She doesn't force Buddy to conform, and she doesn't scold Walter into change. She simply responds to people as they are. That quiet consistency becomes a counterweight to Walter's rigidity, and Steenburgen's grounded performance keeps the family dynamic from tipping into melodrama. Daniel Tay, as Buddy's younger brother Michael, carries more responsibility than it might appear. Child performances often falter by either overplaying cuteness or fading into the background. Tay avoids both. Michael begins embarrassed by Buddy defensive, cautious, socially aware, in a way Buddy isn't. Tay plays that discomfort honestly, without cruelty. His arc mirrors the audience's. He starts by watching Buddy from a distance, then slowly lets himself be pulled into belief. Their relationship evolves not through speeches, but through proximity. Shared moments, small acts of loyalty. Tay's performance sells the idea that belief is contagious. When Michael finally stands up for Buddy, it feels earned because we've watched his resistance soften scene by scene. He's not transformed by magic. He's transformed by example. Zooey Deschanel, while already examined as a lead-adjacent presence, functions narratively as part of the ensemble fabric. Her interactions with the supporting cast, particularly Emily and Michael, help ground Jovi's evolution. She doesn't exist solely in relation to Buddy. She's allowed quiet connections that reinforce the film's central idea. Belief grows in community, not isolation. Then there are the smaller roles, which Elf uses with surgical precision. Peter Dinklage's appearance as Miles Finch could have been a cheap gag. Instead, it becomes a tonal stress test. Finch is cruel, dismissive, and performatively powerful. The joke doesn't land because he's angry. It lands because Buddy refuses to accept that cruelty as normal. Dinklage commits fully to Finch's arrogance, and Ferrell commits fully to Buddy's moral clarity. The collision is explosive. That scene works because both actors believe they're in the right. Even background characters, department store managers, co-workers, strangers on the street are directed to respond realistically. Some are amused by Buddy. Some are irritated. Some are softened. None are exaggerated into caricature. That realism matters. It keeps the world textured. Buddy's optimism doesn't convert everyone instantly, and that resistance gives his impact meaning. What's remarkable is how unified the ensemble feels, despite wildly different energy levels. This isn't accidental casting luck. It's tonal alignment. Every actor understands the film's core rule. Buddy is not the joke. The world's discomfort with him is. Once that rule is internalized, performances click into place. There's also a generosity to the ensemble that's rare in comedies. No one fights for dominance. No one tries to outshine Ferrell. The actors create space for each other, which allows moments to land cleanly. Humor arises from interaction, not competition. That generosity gives the film emotional airflow. Scenes breathe. The ensemble ultimately functions like a tuning fork. When Buddy enters a space, everyone vibrates differently. Some resonate, some clash, some slowly adjust pitch. Watching that process unfold is the real pleasure of the film. It's not about conversion through force. It's about exposure over time. And once that human ecosystem is established, once the cast has given Buddy a world of believable responses, the film still needs one more layer to lock everything in. A physical environment that reflects innocence without artificiality. A visual world that feels handcrafted, intentional, and emotionally legible. Because belief doesn't just live in people, it lives in places. The physical world of Elf isn't just a backdrop, it's an argument. An argument that sincerity deserves texture. That belief looks better when it's built by hand. And that choice begins with production design that refuses to hide behind polish or digital gloss. Elf doesn't want to feel impressive. It wants to feel touched. Production designer Rusty Smith approached the film with a deceptively difficult mandate: create a North Pole that feels magical without feeling artificial, and a New York City that feels harsh without becoming hostile. The solution wasn't scale, it was detail. Everywhere you look, the world tells you how it was made, and that transparency is the point. The North Pole sequences immediately establish this philosophy. Nothing looks mass-produced. Toys are slightly uneven. Colors are bold but not slick. Workspaces feel cramped, communal, and lived in. This isn't a fantasy factory running on invisible magic. It's a workshop. You can sense routine here. That grounding matters because Buddy's innocence doesn't come from abstraction. It comes from structure. He grows up in a place with rules, expectations, and care. The design leans heavily on forced perspective, a classic filmmaking trick used to make Buddy appear oversized among the elves without relying on digital manipulation. Desks shrink. Doorways lower. Furniture compresses. This choice does more than sell scale. It reinforces Buddy's emotional alienation. He literally doesn't fit. And because the effect is practical, not digital, it maintains tactile credibility. Your eye accepts it instinctively. Color plays a huge role in shaping mood. The North Pole bathes itself in saturated primaries, greens, reds, yellows, without tipping into garishness. These colors aren't there to scream Christmas. They're there to signal emotional clarity. Everything is legible, clean, honest. Nothing hides in shadow. Compare that to New York City, where the palette cools dramatically. Grays, blues, muted browns. Glass and steel replace wood and fabric. Emotion drains from the environment before a word is spoken. Buddy's transition into New York isn't just a narrative shift, it's a sensory one. The city feels louder, tighter, less forgiving. Offices are sterile, apartments are boxed in, retail spaces are transactional. Production design communicates cynicism spatially. Adults live in straight lines. Children, when allowed, curve. Walter Hobbs's office is a masterclass in character through space. It's ordered to the point of suffocation. Papers stacked precisely. Furniture arranged for authority, not comfort. There's no personality here, only function. That absence mirrors Walter's emotional state. He's built a life that works, but doesn't feel. When Buddy enters this space, he doesn't disrupt it by being chaotic. He disrupts it by being human. The Hobbs apartment strikes a careful balance. It isn't cold, it's incomplete. Neutral colors dominate. Decorations are minimal. It feels like a place waiting to be lived in rather than one that has been. That distinction allows Buddy's influence to register visually. When decorations appear, when color creeps in, it feels earned, not imposed. The environment changes because the people do. Costume design reinforces this emotional geography. Buddy's outfit is deliberately absurd in scale and texture, but it's never mocked by the camera. The fabric looks heavy, real, worn. This isn't a novelty costume. It's clothing he's lived in. That authenticity protects Buddy from becoming a punchline. The costume doesn't laugh at him. It believes in him. Contrast that with the sharply tailored suits of Walter's world. Clean lines, muted tones, no softness. Clothes here are armor. They signal competence, distance, control. When Walter loosens that armor even slightly, the visual shift mirrors his internal change. Again, nothing is announced. It's shown. Even retail spaces matter. Gimbals isn't portrayed as magical by default. It's a store pretending to be magical. The decorations are excessive, artificial, performative. Buddy recognizes the attempt and meets it with genuine enthusiasm. The design invites that comparison. When Santa arrives and the illusion cracks, the space collapses emotionally. The fake magic can't sustain belief. Only the real kind can. What's striking is how rarely the film relies on visual effects to create wonder. Snow is real. Sets are physical. Textures matter. That commitment anchors fantasy in reality, making belief feel like a choice rather than a trick. The film isn't asking you to admire its world. It's asking you to step into it. This approach also future-proofs the film. Practical design ages better than digital spectacle. The North Pole still feels charming because it was built with intention, not rendered with trends. You can sense hands behind the work. That human presence aligns perfectly with the film's themes. By the time Elf reaches its final act, the world itself has changed. Spaces feel warmer. Colors return. Openness replaces rigidity. The environment reflects emotional resolution without ever spelling it out. That's production design doing narrative work. And once the world is built, once spaces, textures, and colors are carrying emotional meaning, the next layer has to decide how we see it all. Because design sets the stage, but cinematography decides where we look, how long we stay, and what we feel while we're there. The camera doesn't just record belief, it guides it. The cinematography of Elf never begs for attention, and that restraint is precisely why it works. This is a film about belief, not spectacle. The camera's job isn't to impress, it's to protect. To protect Buddy's sincerity, to protect tonal balance, and to protect a world where optimism doesn't look foolish under scrutiny. Director of photography Gregory Gardner approaches the film with an almost invisible discipline. Shots are composed cleanly, coverage is classical, and movement is motivated by emotion rather than energy. That choice runs counter to the era. Early 2000s studio comedies often leaned on aggressive coverage and hyperactive cutting. Elf slows down. It watches. It lets moments land. Framing plays a crucial role in establishing Buddy's perspective. In the North Pole, the camera frequently sits at Buddy's eye level, even when the environment shrinks around him. This isn't accidental. By aligning the lens with Buddy's emotional vantage point, the film invites you to experience the world with him, not observe him from above. When he feels out of place, the frame compresses. When he feels joyful, it opens. Once Buddy enters New York, the visual language shifts subtly but decisively. The city is shot with longer lenses that flatten space, making streets feel crowded and impersonal. Buildings loom. Interiors box characters in. The camera often observes from a slight distance, mirroring Buddy's initial separation from this world. You're not meant to feel dazzled by New York. You're meant to feel overwhelmed by it. Lighting choices reinforce this emotional geography. The North Pole glows with soft, even illumination. Shadows are gentle. Faces are readable. There's nothing threatening in the light itself. In New York, contrast increases. Offices are lit harshly from above. Shadows carve faces. Emotional warmth drains before dialogue does. The city isn't villainous. It's indifferent. The cinematography understands that difference and photographs it accordingly. Camera movement is used sparingly, which makes it meaningful when it appears. Buddy's early moments in New York are often captured with static or minimally mobile shots, emphasizing his uncertainty. As he gains confidence, decorating the department store, connecting with Jovi, the camera begins to move with him. Gentle pans, fluid tracking. The visual language loosens as Buddy does. Movement becomes a reward, not a default. One of the smartest cinematographic choices is scale management. Buddy is often framed to emphasize his physical presence without exaggerating it into absurdity. He fills frames, but he isn't distorted. The lens respects him. Even during physical comedy, the camera avoids aggressive wide-angle mockery. That restraint maintains dignity. The joke never comes at Buddy's expense. There's also a deliberate simplicity in shot composition. Frames are rarely cluttered. Visual information is cleanly organized, allowing emotional beats to register without distraction. This clarity mirrors Buddy's worldview. He sees the world plainly. The camera follows suit. When complications arise, they come from people, not from visual confusion. Night sequences deserve particular attention. Christmas films often lean into hyper-saturated nighttime palettes, glittering lights, exaggerated contrast. Elf resists excess. Night scenes feel cold, grounded, sometimes lonely. Streetlights cast pools of isolation. Interiors feel insulated rather than festive. The film doesn't manufacture warmth through color. It waits for warmth to arrive through behavior. The film's climax. The crowd singing to Power Santa's sleigh. Could have been photographed with bombast. Sweeping crane shots. Rapid cutting. Emotional manipulation through scale. Instead, the cinematography remains intimate. Faces matter more than spectacle. The camera lingers on individual belief accumulating rather than presenting belief as instant mass hysteria. That choice keeps the moment human. Editing supports this philosophy. Cuts are motivated by reaction, not punchlines. Comedy arises from duration, holding a shot just long enough for behavior to register. Buddy decorating the store isn't funny because of fast cuts. It's funny because the camera gives him time to do it. The audience catches up. Laughter follows. There's an almost old-fashioned quality to this visual approach. It trusts the audience. It trusts faces. It trusts rhythm over chaos. That confidence aligns perfectly with the film's thematic core. Belief doesn't need to be shouted. It needs to be sustained. What makes the cinematography endure is its refusal to age itself. No trendy camera tricks, no stylized grading that screams era. The images remain clean, legible, and emotionally honest. You can watch Elf decades later and feel the same visual comfort, not because it's flashy, but because it's stable. By the time the credits roll, the camera has done something quietly radical. It has treated a comedy about an overgrown elf with the same visual respect reserved for dramas about real emotional stakes. Because the stakes are real here. Belief versus cynicism. Openness versus armor. Childlike wonder versus adult fatigue. And once the eyes are convinced, once the camera has guided us gently into this emotional space, another sense takes over. One that bypasses logic entirely. Because what you see sets the stage, but what you hear seals the deal. Music doesn't explain belief. Music doesn't explain belief. It makes you feel it before you're ready. Music in Elf doesn't announce itself as important. It sneaks in. It hums beneath scenes, nudges emotion sideways, and then, when you're least prepared, takes over completely. That restraint is intentional. Composer John Debney understood that scoring this film too aggressively would crush its sincerity. The music had to believe in Buddy as much as the camera did, without telling you how to feel every second. Debney's approach blends classic Christmas orchestration with playful whimsy, but the real achievement lies in emotional timing. The score rarely chases laughs. It supports behavior. When Buddy is joyful, the music doesn't explode, it skips. When he's hurt, the score doesn't dramatize, it recedes. That discipline prevents sentimentality from tipping into manipulation. The main theme carries a childlike simplicity, built around light instrumentation and clear melodic lines. Bells appear, but they don't dominate. Strings lift gently rather than swell. The music feels handmade, echoing the production design's tactile philosophy. You can almost imagine the score being assembled piece by piece, mirroring Buddy's worldview. Nothing hidden, nothing ironic. What makes Debney's work effective is contrast. Early North Pole sequences lean into warmth and rhythmic bounce. There's structure here, but it's playful. The music reinforces routine without rigidity. When Buddy leaves that environment, the score thins out. New York doesn't get big melodies. It gets restraint. Ambient tones, sparse cues. The absence of music becomes expressive, underlining emotional dislocation rather than masking it. Silence plays a bigger role than people realize. Several key moments. Buddy's rejection by Walter, his quiet wandering through the city are underscored or completely bare. That choice trusts the performance. It allows discomfort to breathe. When music finally re-enters, it feels earned. Relief arrives organically, not on cue. Licensed songs are used sparingly and strategically. They reinforce mood rather than hijack it. Christmas standards appear as cultural artifacts, sounds Buddy recognizes and embraces, but they don't replace Debney's thematic work. The film doesn't outsource emotion to familiar hits. It builds its own musical language and lets the classics decorate the edges. Sound design quietly reinforces this philosophy. The North Pole is filled with gentle, rhythmic noise tools, tapping, elves chatting, systems working together. It feels communal. New York, by contrast, is abrasive. Traffic overwhelms dialogue. Offices buzz with mechanical urgency. Sound becomes pressure. Buddy's voice, bright, unguarded, cuts through that noise like an interruption. You hear optimism before you process it. The department store scenes offer a perfect example of audio storytelling. Before Buddy decorates the space, it sounds hollow. Fluorescent lights, echoing footsteps, transactional chatter. Afterward, sound softens. Music appears diegetically. Laughter enters the mix. The environment doesn't just look transformed, it sounds alive. Belief registers sonically. And then there's the film's emotional crescendo, the singing crowd powering Santa's sleigh. This moment could have been bombastic. It isn't. The voices build imperfectly. Some are off-key. Some hesitate. That imperfection matters. It reinforces the film's central argument. Belief isn't polished. It's collective. When the orchestra finally joins, it supports rather than dominates. The music lifts, but it doesn't overwhelm the human voices driving it. Debney understands when to get out of the way. That's the mark of confidence. The score never competes with Farrell's performance or Favreau's direction. It harmonizes. It trusts the story to carry weight on its own. By the final scenes, the music has subtly shifted. Themes introduced with innocence now carry warmth layered with experience. Nothing radical changes. Everything deepens. That restraint allows the ending to resonate without exhausting the audience emotionally. Sound in Elf works the same way Buddy does. It shows up honestly. It doesn't shout. It invites participation. And once you accept that invitation, the film does something rare. It lets you feel belief without demanding you explain it. But while the finished film flows effortlessly, its creation was anything but effortless. Behind the warmth and polish lies a production journey filled with logistical challenges, risky decisions, and moments where the film nearly lost its balance. Because making sincerity look easy is one of the hardest things filmmaking can attempt. By the time Elf looks effortless on screen, it has already survived a production that could have derailed it at multiple points. The behind-the-scenes story isn't filled with explosive conflicts or tabloid drama. It's more precarious than that. This was a film constantly walking a tonal tightrope, where one wrong decision could have turned sincerity into embarrassment. Every day on set was about protection. Protect the tone, protect the character, protect the belief. Filming took place across multiple locations, with New York City presenting the biggest challenge. Favreau insisted on shooting Buddy's introduction to the city in real environments, not controlled backlots. That decision gave the film authenticity and created chaos. Many of Will Ferrell's most iconic moments were filmed guerrilla style, with real pedestrians who had no idea a movie was being shot. Ferrell running through traffic, Ferrell hugging strangers, Ferrell reacting to real confusion, real discomfort, real surprise. Those reactions aren't performances, they're documentary fragments. That approach carried risk. There were no guarantees people would play along. Some didn't, and that friction made it into the film. Buddy's energy colliding with genuine New York indifference adds texture you can't fake. It also required Ferrell to remain fully in character under unpredictable conditions. No resets, no crowd control, just commitment. That kind of exposure demands trust between actor and director, and Favreau gave Ferrell the space to stay inside Buddy's emotional truth, even when the environment pushed back. The infamous coffee shop scene, where Buddy lists his favorite food groups, was filmed with minimal setup. Ferrell leaned into spontaneity, responding to the space rather than dictating it. That looseness extends across many city scenes. The film captures a New York that feels lived in rather than staged, which reinforces Buddy's outsider status. He's not entering a cinematic version of the city. He's entering the real thing. The North Pole sequences, by contrast, required meticulous planning. Forced perspective shots demand precision. Actor placement had to be exact. Camera height, lens choice, set dimensions, all carefully calibrated to sell scale without visual effects. These setups were time-consuming and unforgiving. A slight misstep ruined the illusion. A slight misstep ruined the illusion. The crew had to work with old-school discipline. committing to techniques that left no room for fix-it-later. That choice slowed production but preserved the film's tactile honesty. Will Ferrell's costume added another layer of difficulty. The buddy outfit wasn't designed for comfort. Heavy fabric, tight leggings, and rigid boots made long shooting days physically demanding. Ferrell committed anyway, often performing physical comedy repeatedly without complaint. That endurance shows up on screen. Buddy's boundless energy isn't simulated, it's exerted. James Caan approached the set with a vastly different rhythm. Known for precision and professionalism, he initially struggled with the film's looseness. That tension between Ferrell's improvisational energy and Caan's structured approach could have fractured scenes. Instead, Favreau leaned into it. Walter's rigidity wasn't something to soften behind the camera. It became fuel for the performance. What felt like friction off-screen translated into authenticity on-screen. Zooey Deschanel's experience reflected the film's tonal balance. Her musical background became an asset, particularly during the singing scenes, but she also had to calibrate restraint carefully. Early takes leaned too flat. Later ones risked tipping into sentimentality. Finding the exact emotional temperature required iteration. Favreau adjusted quietly, guiding performances through tone rather than instruction. He wasn't chasing specific readings, he was protecting feel. One of the most delicate challenges involved the film's ending. The crowd singing sequence had to feel spontaneous, not staged. Too polished, and the message collapses. Too messy, and the moment loses coherence. The solution was controlled imperfection. Background performers were encouraged to sing imperfectly. Timing wasn't rigid. The sound mix preserved human inconsistency. That decision elevated the scene from spectacle to participation. Weather also became an unplanned collaborator. Cold conditions during New York shoots affected performances and logistics. Breath fogged, hands numbed. Ferrell's visible discomfort sometimes enhanced Buddy's vulnerability rather than detracting from it. The environment pushed back, and the film absorbed that resistance. Favreau's directing style on set emphasized calm. No raised voices, no panic. That steadiness mattered, especially on a film built around emotional clarity. Crew members have described the set as unusually cohesive, a place where people understood the goal even if the process felt unconventional. That shared understanding kept the film aligned when pressure mounted. Perhaps the most revealing behind-the-scenes reality is how often the film almost overcorrected. Studio concerns occasionally pushed for bigger jokes, faster pacing, clearer punchlines. Favreau resisted not by confrontation, but by demonstration. He showed that the material worked best when it trusted the audience. That confidence was earned day by day, take by take. Editing became the final safeguard. Scenes were shaped to preserve rhythm rather than maximize laughs. Jokes that landed too hard were softened. Moments that breathed were protected. The film chose emotional continuity over comedic density. That restraint is invisible and essential. By the time Elf reached completion, it had survived the hardest test any sincere film faces, resisting the urge to apologize for itself. Nothing about its production suggests cynicism. Nothing feels manufactured for safety. The film arrives exactly as it intends to be. And then it met the public. And numbers entered the conversation. Because belief is powerful. But in Hollywood, belief always has to prove itself at the box office. When Elf opened in November 2003, it didn't arrive as a guaranteed hit. Studio confidence existed, but it was cautious confidence, the kind that hopes rather than assumes. Holiday releases are volatile. Audiences are distracted. Competition is fierce. And comedies built on sincerity don't always explode out of the gate. What happened instead was something far more valuable than a flashy debut. Elf didn't just open well, it stayed. The film debuted solidly rather than spectacularly, posting an opening weekend that signaled interest without frenzy. That mattered. Studios watch opening weekends for hype, but they watch week-to-week drops for truth. And Elf held. Strongly. Audiences didn't just show up. they told other people to come with them. The movie developed legs, the clearest sign that something is connecting beyond marketing. By the end of its theatrical run, Elf had earned well over $220 million worldwide against a modest production budget, placing it firmly in the profitable category. But raw numbers only tell half the story. This wasn't a four-quadrant blockbuster built on spectacle. It was a mid-budget comedy that quietly became a seasonal staple. That distinction matters. The film didn't spike, it accumulated. Domestic performance did the heavy lifting. American audiences embraced Elf as a holiday tradition almost immediately, returning for repeat viewings. Families brought children. Adults came back without them. That crossover appeal is rare, especially for comedies anchored by such a specific tonal gamble. The movie didn't need global domination to succeed. It needed longevity, and it got it. Internationally, the film performed respectably rather than explosively, which actually reinforces its identity. Elf is deeply rooted in American Christmas iconography department stores, Manhattan work culture, Santa mythology filtered through US pop tradition. That specificity limited some overseas appeal, but strengthened domestic resonance. The film knew who it was for, and that clarity paid dividends. Home media transformed Elf from a hit into a phenomenon. DVD sales surged, aided by repeat viewing friendliness and family accessibility. This was the era when DVDs still mattered, when owning a movie meant ritual. Elf became one of those titles that lived on shelves and resurfaced every December. That recurring presence compounded its cultural footprint year after year. Television broadcast deals extended that reach further. Annual airings cemented the film's place in holiday rotation, turning it into background comfort and shared tradition. Unlike flashier seasonal releases that burn bright and fade, Elf embedded itself quietly. That kind of success doesn't show up immediately on opening weekend charts. It shows up decades later. Merchandising followed naturally. Buddy costumes, quotes on mugs, decorations. Again, not because the film pushed branding aggressively, but because audiences wanted to carry pieces of it with them. That's an important distinction. Manufactured demand fades. Organic affection multiplies. From a studio perspective, Elf validated a risky philosophy. It proved that sincerity could sell. That comedy didn't need edge to endure. That family films didn't need to talk down to children or wink at adults to survive. Those lessons ripple outward. You can trace a line from Elf's success to later holiday releases that dared to play emotion straight without apology. The film also reshaped Will Ferrell's box office identity. Before Elf, Ferrell was a comedic force, but not a reliable anchor for cross-generational appeal. After Elf, he became something rarer, a star who could carry absurdity and heart simultaneously. That versatility expanded his market value and altered the types of projects studios were willing to greenlight around him. What's striking is how Elf continues to earn long after its release. Streaming numbers surge every holiday season. Sales spike annually. Few films enjoy that cyclical revival without exhaustion. Elf does because it doesn't feel mandatory. It feels chosen. Audiences return because they want to, not because tradition demands it. Financial success here wasn't about domination. It was about durability. The movie didn't conquer a single moment. It claimed a recurring place in cultural time. Every December, Elf becomes new again. That's box office alchemy studios chase endlessly and rarely replicate. And with success came scrutiny. Critics revisited early impressions. Cultural commentators reassessed its tone. What started as a seasonal curiosity began to register as something more substantial, because numbers can open doors, but meaning is decided elsewhere. By the time critics encountered Elf, the question wasn't whether it worked as a comedy. The question was whether anyone would let it work. In 2003, sincerity was unfashionable. Holiday films were either aggressively ironic or aggressively sentimental, and Elf sat in an uncomfortable middle space. Open-hearted without being saccharine, goofy without being cruel. That tonal gamble split early reactions in subtle but telling ways. Initial reviews were largely positive, though cautiously so. Critics praised Will Ferrell's performance almost immediately, recognizing that he had tapped into something different from his usual comedic arsenal. Words like unexpected, surprisingly tender, and disarming surfaced again and again. Ferrell wasn't just being funny, he was being emotionally legible. That distinction mattered, especially to reviewers accustomed to bracing themselves against broad studio comedies. The film's humor earned consistent approval. Reviewers noted how jokes emerged from character rather than cruelty, how Buddy's innocence reframed adult absurdity instead of ridiculing it. The fish out of water structure was familiar, but critics acknowledged how cleanly Elf executed it. There was a sense that the film understood its own limits and refused to overstep them. Where opinion diverged was tone. Some critics resisted the film's earnestness, mistaking restraint for simplicity. A few argued that the movie leaned too heavily into sweetness, that it asked audiences to suspend too much cynicism too quickly. Those critiques weren't wrong so much as revealing. Elf wasn't interested in negotiating belief. It demanded it. For viewers unwilling to meet it halfway, the experience could feel cloying. For those who did, it felt refreshing. Audience response quickly tipped the scale. CinemaScore ratings reflected strong word of mouth, particularly among families and younger viewers. Importantly, adults without children also responded. That dual appeal challenged the idea that Elf was merely a kids' movie. The humor wasn't simplified, it was clarified. Emotional beats landed because they weren't buried under sarcasm. Over time, critical perception softened and then strengthened. As the film returned to theaters, television, and home viewing year after year, reassessment kicked in. What once seemed overly sincere began to read as confident. What once felt small began to feel precise. The very qualities that made some critics uneasy. Its lack of irony, its emotional transparency, became its calling cards. Culturally, Elf embedded itself faster than almost any holiday release of its era. Lines entered common usage. Costumes became staples. Scenes transformed into shorthand for seasonal joy. But the film's deeper influence runs quieter. It helped re-legitimize kindness as a comedic value, not politeness. Kindness, the willingness to care openly without preemptive defense. This shift mattered. The early 2000s leaned heavily on detachment. Comedies often shielded themselves with meanness, mistaking sharpness for intelligence. Elf rejected that equation. It suggested that empathy could be funny, not in spite of itself, but because of itself. That suggestion didn't dominate immediately, but it lingered. Holiday films released in the wake of Elf began to recalibrate. More emphasis on emotional sincerity. More trust in audience warmth. Fewer jokes designed to humiliate characters for existing. While not every successor succeeded, the tonal permission Elf granted was undeniable. It proved there was still appetite for optimism that didn't feel manufactured. The film's reputation improved with age, a rare trajectory for comedies. Jokes didn't sour. Performances didn't feel dated. The absence of topical references helped, but so did emotional clarity. Buddy's values aren't tied to a moment. They're tied to behavior. That universality insulated the film from cultural erosion. Academic and critical writing around holiday cinema often points to Elf as a pivot point, a film that bridged classical Christmas sentiment with modern comedic rhythms. It didn't parody the genre, it refined it. By grounding fantasy in emotional realism, it offered a template that felt both nostalgic and contemporary. Perhaps the most telling marker of Elf's cultural acceptance is how it's discussed now, not as a guilty pleasure, not as a relic, but as a reference point. When new holiday films arrive, comparisons surface instinctively. Does it have the heart of Elf? The rewatchability? The balance? That's legacy in action. Not dominance, but definition. And with that definition comes the final question any enduring film must face. What does it mean? Beyond laughs, beyond tradition, beyond box office and nostalgia. Because staying power isn't about repetition, it's about resonance. Elf endures because it understands something deceptively simple and quietly radical. Belief is an action, not a feeling. It's something you do, again and again, often in the face of embarrassment. Buddy the Elf doesn't just believe in Christmas, Santa, or kindness. He practices belief publicly, without armor. And the film builds its entire thematic spine around the cost and power of that choice. At its core, Elf is a story about adulthood as amnesia. Walter Hobbs isn't cruel because he lacks empathy. He's cruel because he's forgotten how to access it. Work has replaced wonder. Efficiency has replaced joy. Emotional restraint has been mistaken for maturity. Buddy enters this world not to overthrow it, but to remind it of what it traded away. That's why the film's conflict isn't external. It's internal. The question isn't whether Buddy will change. It's whether the world will remember. Buddy represents unfiltered authenticity. He says what he feels. He reacts as emotions arrive. He doesn't edit himself for social comfort. In most adult contexts, that behavior is punished. Elf doesn't deny that. Buddy is rejected, mocked, sidelined. The film acknowledges the risk of sincerity. But it also insists that suppression costs more in the long run. Walter's success comes at the price of connection. Jovi's self-protection comes at the price of joy. The city's efficiency comes at the price of warmth. Christmas, in this framework, is less a holiday than a stress test. It exposes what people value when they're asked to slow down. For Buddy, the answer is obvious. For everyone else, it's uncomfortable. The film's genius lies in refusing to sentimentalize that discomfort. Change doesn't come easily. It comes through friction, through embarrassment, through choosing vulnerability when cynicism feels safer. The film also quietly interrogates masculinity. Walter embodies a version of manhood defined by control, productivity, and emotional distance. Buddy offers an alternative open affection, expressive joy, unguarded care. The story doesn't mock Walter's model. It contextualizes it. Then it shows its limits. Walter's arc isn't about abandoning responsibility. It's about integrating feeling back into it. Strength doesn't disappear when softness enters. It deepens. Family, too, is redefined. Elf rejects the idea that family is purely biological or purely functional. Buddy is raised by elves who choose him. He builds connection through behavior, not blood. The film suggests that belonging is earned through presence, not obligation. That idea resonates far beyond holiday fantasy. It's why audiences return. The emotional math still works. Visually, musically, and structurally, every element reinforces this thematic core. Practical sets over digital gloss. Gentle scores over manipulative swells. Performances rooted in truth rather than irony. The film's craft aligns with its message. Nothing hides. Everything shows its seams. That transparency mirrors Buddy's worldview and invites audiences to lower their defenses in response. In the larger context of holiday cinema, Elf occupies a rare space. It's not nostalgic in the traditional sense. It doesn't yearn for a lost past. It argues for an available present. You don't need to become a child again. You need to remember that belief requires participation. Singing matters. Decorating matters. Showing up matters. Not because they're magical, but because they're chosen. Rewatchability becomes the ultimate proof of this philosophy. People don't return to Elf for plot surprises. They return for emotional alignment, for the reassurance that openness is still viable. That kindness isn't naive. That joy doesn't need justification. Each viewing becomes an act of agreement with the film's values. Is Elf perfect? No. Some jokes land softer than others. Certain beats feel deliberately simple. But those imperfections are part of its charm. Polished belief would contradict the message. The film succeeds because it's willing to look a little silly in service of something sincere. In Jon Favreau's career, Elf stands as an early manifesto. Long before massive franchises and digital worlds, he made a case for heart-first storytelling, for respecting audiences enough to trust their emotional intelligence. That philosophy echoes through his later work, but nowhere is it purer than here. In Will Ferrell's filmography, Buddy remains singular, a performance built not on dominance but on openness, not on satire but on trust. It's the role that proves comedy doesn't have to protect itself to be powerful. Ultimately, Elf isn't about Christmas. It's about courage. The courage to believe loudly, the courage to care visibly, the courage to sing when your voice might crack. That's why it lasts. That's why it returns every year. And that's why, long after the decorations come down, Elf still feels like an invitation rather than a memory. What often gets mislabeled as Elf's charm is actually its precision. The comedy feels loose, but it isn't casual. It's engineered around restraint, timing, and a deep understanding of how laughter works when irony is removed. This is not a joke machine firing punchlines at maximum speed. It's something riskier, comedy that waits. Most of Elf's humor comes from behavior rather than wordplay. Buddy doesn't deliver jokes. He behaves according to a consistent internal logic, and the world reacts. That distinction is crucial. When Buddy pours syrup on spaghetti, the laugh isn't in the act itself. It's in the confidence with which he does it. No hesitation, no check for approval. The comedy lives in certainty colliding with social norms. Repetition is the film's most powerful comedic weapon. Modern comedies often fear repetition, worried it signals creative laziness. Elf understands the opposite. Repetition creates rhythm. Buddy's love of sugar isn't funny once. It becomes funny when it refuses to evolve. Each recurrence reaffirms character logic, and the audience laughs not because it's new, but because it's inevitable. Timing does the rest. Favreau frequently lets shots linger a beat longer than expected. That pause matters. Comedy isn't about speed, it's about when you stop. Buddy finishing someone else's sentence with absolute confidence. Buddy standing proudly after a social misfire. The camera stays. The silence stretches. The laugh arrives because the film trusts it will. Physical comedy is present, but it's controlled. Ferrell's movements are big, but never chaotic. He runs with purpose. He gestures with joy, not desperation. There's a childlike geometry to his motion, straight lines, open shapes, full commitment. That physical clarity mirrors Buddy's emotional clarity. Nothing is half done. Nothing is hedged. Contrast fuels the humor. Walter's stillness makes Buddy's motion funnier. Jovi's quiet makes Buddy's singing louder. New York's indifference sharpens Buddy's enthusiasm. Comedy here is relational. Remove the resistance, and the humor evaporates. That's why the ensemble's discipline matters so much. Everyone understands that their job isn't to be funny. It's to be stable so Buddy can be. The film also avoids escalation traps. Many comedies feel obligated to go bigger, louder, more outrageous as they progress. Elf resists that urge. The jokes don't escalate in scale, they deepen in meaning. By the end, Buddy's behavior hasn't changed, but our understanding of it has. What once read as naivete now reads as courage. The laughter shifts from surprise to recognition. Importantly, the film never weaponizes embarrassment. Buddy is embarrassed, yes, but the camera doesn't enjoy it. The humor doesn't come from humiliation. That single choice separates Elf from dozens of comedies that age poorly. Laughing with a character ages better than laughing at them. Always. Even dialogue follows this principle. Lines are simple, declarative, almost childlike. I'm in love. I'm in love. And I don't care who knows it. That's funny not because it's clever, but because adults don't talk that way anymore. The joke is cultural drift. The laughter is recognition. What makes this comedy endure is that it doesn't rush you past feeling. It lets joy exist without commentary. It lets awkwardness sit without apology. It lets sincerity take up space. That space is where laughter becomes memory rather than reaction. And this is where Elf becomes quietly confrontational. Because once the jokes land, once the laughter fades, the film leaves you with a strange discomfort. Why does this feel harder to do in real life? Why does Buddy's openness feel brave instead of obvious? Answering that question pushes the film beyond comedy and into something more psychological. Something that explains not just why we laugh, but why we resist the values underneath the laughter. What Elf understands, and what makes some adults quietly uneasy, is that growing up isn't the same thing as maturing. The film draws a sharp, almost uncomfortable line between the two, then dares you to stand on the wrong side of it. Buddy isn't childish because he lacks intelligence. He's childlike because he hasn't learned the adult skill of emotional suppression, and that difference is where the psychology of the film lives. Adult life, as Elf presents it, is built on defense mechanisms. Politeness replaces honesty. Productivity replaces presence. Emotional restraint masquerades as responsibility. Walter Hobbs doesn't reject Buddy because Buddy is inconvenient. He rejects him because Buddy exposes the rules Walter lives by. Don't feel too much. Don't show weakness. Don't disrupt the system. Buddy breaks every rule without realizing they exist. That's why Buddy feels threatening, not disruptive. Threatening. Psychologically, Buddy functions as a mirror. He reflects back what adults have trained themselves not to do. He says, "I love you," without bracing for rejection. He celebrates without checking the room. He believes promises literally. Watching him forces other characters and the audience to confront the gap between who they are and who they once were. That gap hurts. Laughter becomes a release valve for discomfort. Walter's arc is often described as a softening, but that undersells it. What happens to Walter isn't emotional growth, it's emotional permission. He doesn't learn new values, he remembers old ones. The film suggests that adulthood didn't replace belief, it buried it under survival strategies. Walter's transformation isn't about becoming childlike, it's about becoming integrated. Jovi's resistance works differently. Her detachment isn't rooted in ambition or control. It's rooted in disappointment. She's learned that hope hurts. Her flat affect is protective, not dismissive. Psychologically, she represents a different adult response to the same problem. If belief leads to pain, disengage before it forms. Buddy doesn't argue with that logic. He simply outlasts it. What's remarkable is how the film never frames cynicism as intelligence. That's the quiet provocation. In many modern stories, skepticism is coded as wisdom. Elf flips that coding. Cynicism here is a wound response. Belief is framed as resilience. That's a deeply countercultural message, especially in adult spaces where irony functions as social currency. The city itself reinforces this psychology. New York isn't villainized, it's conditioned. Everything moves quickly. Efficiency matters. Emotional excess is inconvenient. Buddy doesn't fail in this environment because he's incapable. He fails because the environment doesn't reward presence. The film doesn't argue that adulthood is evil. It argues that adulthood is narrow. This is why the film resonates so strongly with viewers who don't necessarily identify with Buddy, but with Walter. Many adults watch Elf from a position of recognition rather than aspiration. They laugh, then wince. They remember moments when belief felt embarrassing, when joy felt unsafe, when sincerity had consequences. The film doesn't shame that recognition. It invites reflection. Even the climactic singing scene operates psychologically rather than fantastically. Singing together isn't magic, it's vulnerability in public. It's people choosing to participate despite awkwardness. The sleigh doesn't lift because sound waves reach a quota. It lifts because enough people drop their guard at the same time. That's not fantasy logic, that's social psychology. What Elf ultimately suggests is that adulthood isn't defined by what you know. It's defined by what you allow yourself to express. Buddy isn't wise because he's ignorant of pain. He's brave because he's willing to risk it repeatedly. The film never claims that belief is painless. It shows the opposite. Buddy gets hurt, rejected, mocked. He keeps going anyway. That's the distinction many viewers miss. Elf isn't arguing that belief is easy. It's arguing that belief is expensive. It costs dignity. It costs comfort. it costs safety. Cynicism, by contrast, is cheap. It protects, it distances, it numbs. And the film asks a question it never answers directly. What is that protection costing you? By reframing childhood not as ignorance, but as openness, Elf turns nostalgia into a psychological challenge. You don't miss being young because life was simpler. You miss it because you were less defended. The film doesn't ask you to regress. It asks you to choose differently now. And that choice, the decision to re-enter belief voluntarily, is exactly why Elf doesn't just endure as a movie. It endures as a ritual. Because people don't return to it for jokes alone. They return to rehearse a feeling they don't practice often enough. And that leads to a deeper question: why some movies invite endless rewatching, while others exhaust themselves after one viewing. There's a specific category of films people don't just enjoy. They return to them, not out of obligation, not out of nostalgia alone, out of comfort mixed with recognition. Elf sits firmly in that category, and its rewatchability has very little to do with plot or novelty. It's about emotional accessibility. Elf works in fragments. You can catch 10 minutes of it on television and feel satisfied. You can drop into the middle of a scene, Buddy decorating the store, Buddy singing, Buddy confronting Walter, and the emotional logic is instantly readable. That matters. Rewatch movies don't demand full attention. They invite presence without pressure. Elf understands that and structures itself accordingly. Part of this comes from narrative clarity. The stakes are emotional, not informational. You don't need to remember twists. You don't need to track mechanics. The story resets emotionally every time Buddy enters a room. His values don't evolve, so the audience doesn't need to recalibrate. That consistency is rare and comforting. You know exactly who you're spending time with. Tone plays an even bigger role. Elf never spikes stress unnecessarily. Conflict exists, but it doesn't dominate. Even the film's tensest moments are softened by behavioral sincerity. That makes it ideal for repeat viewing, especially during a season when people seek emotional regulation rather than stimulation. You don't watch Elf to be surprised, you watch it to feel aligned. The film also benefits from what psychologists call predictive pleasure. Knowing what's coming doesn't diminish enjoyment, it enhances it. When Buddy eats spaghetti with syrup, the laugh comes early because anticipation does the work. When the singing begins at the end, the emotion arrives before the scene does. Rewatchability thrives on that rhythm. Anticipation becomes participation. Holiday timing amplifies this effect. Elf isn't just watched, it's scheduled. December returns, and so does the film. That repetition builds ritual. Over time, scenes attach themselves to memories outside the movie. Family gatherings, quiet nights, background noise during decoration. The film becomes emotionally porous, absorbing context from the viewer's life rather than demanding attention from it. Another key factor is tonal safety. Elf doesn't rely on topical references, cultural satire, or shock humor. Nothing ages aggressively. There's no moment where modern audiences wince at a joke that overstayed its era. The humor is behavioral and relational, which gives it longevity. People don't outgrow it, they grow into it. The performances support this loop. Ferrell's Buddy doesn't exhaust, that's crucial. Many comedic characters burn bright once and fade fast. Buddy doesn't. His emotional consistency makes him easier to revisit. You don't brace for him, you welcome him, you welcome him. That distinction explains why people rarely say they're in the mood for Elf. They just put it on. Importantly, the film allows passive engagement without punishment. You can look away and come back. You can multitask. The emotional through line remains intact. That's not laziness in design, it's generosity. Elf meets viewers where they are, not where the movie demands they be. This also explains why Elf dominates television rotation year after year. It survives edits. It survives commercials. It survives distraction. That resilience is a form of design success rarely discussed. Films that require immersion often lose power in fragmented viewing. Elf gains it. Rewatchability here isn't accidental. It's the result of emotional legibility, tonal warmth, and narrative simplicity aligned with sincerity. The film doesn't compete for attention. It keeps company. And in a seasonal context built around gathering, repetition, and comfort, that companionship becomes invaluable. But there's an uncomfortable truth hiding underneath all of this comfort. The very reasons Elf replays so effortlessly are the same reasons it would struggle to be made today, at least in the same form. Because modern filmmaking has grown increasingly suspicious of exactly what Elf offers without apology. There's a quiet reason Elf feels increasingly rare, and it has nothing to do with nostalgia. It's because the modern studio ecosystem has grown deeply suspicious of the very qualities that make the film work. If Elf were pitched today, unchanged, unapologetic, it would trigger a cascade of fixes that would slowly, inevitably, break it. The first note would be about Buddy himself. He'd be softened, explained, given a backstory wound that justifies his sincerity. Modern scripts are uncomfortable with characters who don't self-diagnose. Buddy would be required to articulate why he believes so openly, as if belief without explanation is irresponsible. The mystery of his optimism would be replaced with psychology, and the magic would drain out with it. Then the irony would creep in. Someone would insist the film needs to acknowledge how ridiculous this is. A wink, a meta-joke, a line where Buddy realizes he's strange and comments on it. That single concession would collapse the entire structure. Elf works because Buddy never steps outside himself. The moment he does, sincerity becomes performance instead of identity. Tone would be the next casualty. Modern comedies often fear earnestness unless it's heavily insulated by sarcasm. Emotional moments are undercut preemptively, as if the audience can't be trusted not to cringe. Elf refuses that instinct. Today's version would sand down silence, rush past vulnerability, and replace emotional pauses with jokes designed to reassure viewers they're still in on it. Walter's arc would change too. His rigidity would likely be reframed as villainy rather than damage. Nuance would be traded for clarity. Instead of a man unlearning emotional suppression, he'd become a symbol to defeat. That shift would flatten the film's most important psychological insight, that cynicism isn't evil, it's protective. Remove that empathy, and the story becomes simpler and smaller. Even the ending would be altered. The communal singing would be tightened, polished, auto-tuned emotionally, if not musically. Imperfection would be treated as weakness rather than proof of authenticity. The moment would be engineered for virality instead of participation. It would look better. It would feel worse. Casting, too, would face pressure. Buddy might skew younger, or cooler, or more self-aware. The discomfort of watching an adult man behave with childlike openness would be labeled risky. That risk is the point. Elf isn't safe. It just feels safe because it refuses to attack. Modern sensibilities often confuse gentleness with passivity. Elf is anything but passive. What all of this reveals is a broader cultural shift. Contemporary storytelling often prioritizes control, of tone, of audience reaction, of interpretation. Elf relinquishes control. It doesn't tell you how to feel about belief. It shows you what belief looks like and lets you decide whether to join. That openness is harder to monetize, harder to predict, harder to optimize. And yet, that's exactly why Elf survives while louder, sharper, more self-aware comedies fade. It doesn't chase relevance. It trusts permanence. It doesn't try to outsmart the audience. It invites them. This isn't an argument that films today lack heart. It's an argument that heart now comes wrapped in disclaimers. Elf offers none. It doesn't apologize for its values. It doesn't hedge its optimism. It doesn't protect itself from mockery. It stands there, exposed, and asks a simple question: what if sincerity is enough? That question feels increasingly radical, which is why Elf doesn't feel like a relic. It feels like a challenge. And that challenge leads to the only ending that makes sense. Not a summary, not a verdict, but a reframing. One final shift in how we see Buddy, and, by extension, ourselves. Buddy the elf is often described as naive. That word feels gentle, even affectionate, but it misses the point. Naivete implies ignorance. Buddy isn't ignorant. He understands rejection. He experiences humiliation. He feels disappointment deeply. What separates him from everyone else isn't lack of awareness, it's refusal to retreat. That's the final reframe Elf quietly demands. Buddy knows the world doesn't work the way he wishes it did. The film shows this repeatedly. He's told he doesn't belong. He's mocked publicly. He's rejected by the one person whose acceptance matters most to him. And when those things happen, Buddy doesn't shrug them off. He absorbs them. He feels them fully. The difference is what he does next. He keeps choosing openness. That choice is the film's most radical idea. Elf isn't arguing that belief protects you from pain. It argues the opposite. Belief guarantees pain. You can't be disappointed if you don't hope. You can't be embarrassed if you don't express joy. You can't be rejected if you don't offer yourself first. Cynicism is safer. That's why it's tempting. Buddy rejects safety. In that sense, Buddy isn't a child trapped in an adult body. He's an adult who refuses to anesthetize himself. He practices emotional exposure in a culture built around emotional management. That's why the film lands differently as viewers age. Children laugh at Buddy's behavior. Adults recognize the cost of it. And that's why Elf lingers. The film never pretends that Buddy's way of moving through the world is easy. It shows the bruises. What it refuses to accept is the idea that those bruises mean he's wrong. Instead, it asks whether the alternative emotional insulation, controlled joy, preemptive detachment, is actually strength or just habit. Walter's final decision isn't framed as redemption. It's framed as relief. He doesn't become someone new. He becomes someone less burdened. That's important. Elf doesn't glorify regression. It advocates recovery. Recovery of feeling, recovery of presence, recovery of courage. And courage is the correct word here. There's courage in singing when you might sound bad. Courage in saying, I love you, without guarantees. Courage in decorating a space no one asked you to care about. Courage in believing when belief has failed you before. Buddy practices that courage relentlessly. Not loudly, relentlessly. That's why the film's final image isn't triumph. It's participation. People don't suddenly become better. They simply join in. They sing, imperfectly, briefly, together. The sleigh lifting is almost incidental. The real miracle happens earlier, when people decide not to opt out. This is why Elf survives trends, tastes, and tonal shifts. It doesn't depend on cleverness. It depends on willingness. And willingness doesn't age. In a media landscape increasingly built around distance through irony, through commentary, through constant self-awareness, Elf stands as a reminder that closeness still works, that directness still lands, that sincerity, when practiced without apology, doesn't weaken art. It sharpens it. That's the film's quiet challenge. Not to believe in Christmas, not to believe in Christmas, not to believe in Santa, but to believe that openness is still viable in adult life. That joy doesn't need permission. That care doesn't need justification. You don't watch Elf to escape reality. You watch it to remember an option reality keeps pressuring you to abandon. Buddy doesn't change the world by being right. He changes it by staying visible. And every December, when people return to this film, knowingly, predictably, almost ritualistically, they aren't just revisiting a holiday comedy. They're rehearsing a version of themselves they don't want to forget.